Welcome into episode 412 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Scott McLaughlin. It is trade deadline day in the NHL. That deadline came and went at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Scott and I are speaking to you at 8 o'clock. There was a lot to go over. Don Sweeney spoke to the media, and we had to see all these trades come in. And Scott, I'll just say this. I have no idea what we're going to talk about today.
I know Bruins didn't do anything, right?
Oh my goodness. This has to be, Scott, this has to be one of the biggest days in franchise history when you talk about the names that went out. This has not happened very often. Even it was 20 years since the Bruins were sellers at the deadline, but that deadline paled in comparison to what took place today.
Yeah, I mean, look, just for starters, like they traded Brad Marchand. Like that actually happened. Captain, franchise legend, future Hall of Famer, 63 going to the rafters, arguably a top 10 player in franchise history. Traded. Like, so it's just start there. Like that alone is monumental. Like maybe it's definitely not quite Ray Bourque level, but there aren't too many after that would be bigger than this in terms of just the franchise icon getting moved. And then you add Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo on top of it, two core pieces, two longtime Bruins, two guys who have done a lot of good for your organization, loved by fans, loved in the community, have been great representatives for the franchise. Yeah, like it's a lot. It's absolutely a monumental day, and it's the big sell, right? Like we talked about shows on both stations, talked about, is it going to be big sell, small sell? What are they going to do? Like this was big. It's not complete teardown, right? Like David Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy, Jeremy Swayman, they're still here. So it's not that, but it's the next thing below that. I mean, yeah, all of these deals individually, I would not have been surprised by. Like we talked about all of them, and we put all of them on the table. That they all happened. That it went this deep, and it was all three of those guys specifically. I'll admit, like that surprised me. Like I thought one or two of them.
Oh, 1,000%, Scott. I agree with you. I thought that there was a chance that between Carlo, Coyle, and Marchand, that one or two of them may have been dealt between now and June. Maybe. Right? Obviously, Marchand would have had to have been now because of the UFA status. But yeah, the nature of it all happening between 2 and 3 p.m. today, I was so surprised that the Bruins and Don Sweeney actually did this. And we can talk about what we will. We're going to break all the trades down. But as it pertains to just a shock to the system for Bruins fans, the Joe Thornton trade is the one that comes to mind. But that was a different situation because it was you were trading the active captain of the team, and he was in the middle of an MVP season. He was in his prime. Marchand is turning 37 in May, pending UFA. And then, of course, you have the subsequent deals around him today that it's kind of like it's overwhelming for Bruins fans. It's an overwhelming amount of information to take in a 1 day, couple of hours stretch, right? But Scott, before we get into the nitty and gritty of each deal, I'll just say this up front. Overall, I think that this was a very necessary day for the Boston Bruins to move forward as an organization. And I think that 4 of the 5 trades that they made are clear, long-term looking upgrades for the organization as it pertains to putting them in a better position to draft, develop, and get younger and more skilled. This is going to be a process, but 4 of the 5 deals, in my opinion, put the Bruins in a better position for their future. And I give Don Sweeney credit for going through with this. and I've been saying this all along, Scott, and I still feel this way, that I didn't think that Don Sweeney would sell unless he got that green light from ownership. You're certainly not trading Brad Marchand if ownership is not giving you the green light to do so. I was telling you and Bridget over the last few months that I felt it was probably best for the Bruins to sell, but I didn't think that being in playoff contention that Sweeney would do it, because it would put his own job security at risk if the ownership wanted playoffs. And I just thought that unless ownership gave him that green light because they see what the reality is, then he wasn't going to sell. And I do think that in recent weeks, maybe a month or so, I do think that they have had that conversation. And I think that Don Sweeney got the okay from ownership with probably a hint and a nod and a wink that you can do this, Don, and we're not going to fire you. Like we're going forward together. So I will give ownership credit in this situation because they get talked about a lot as only wanting playoff gate. And this was a move that kind of goes against that. So I think they deserve credit for this. And I think Don Sweeney had a pretty bold day out there, Scott. And so we can get into all the details now if you would like.
Oh, yeah, he certainly did. Yeah, so let's go. Definitely worth going through each of these trades. And just for the sake of like taking this deadline as a whole, we'll start with the Trent Frederic one. Like, let's just get all of them. So on the 4th, which was Tuesday, it's Trent Frederic and Max Jones to the Edmonton Oilers for 2025 second round pick, 2026 fourth round pick, and defense prospect Max Warner. Thursday night, after that loss, Justin Brazeau to the Minnesota Wild for Jacob Lauko, Marat Husnudinov, and was there 6th round pick in there? But essentially those two players, yeah. Okay, so then Friday comes. So those are the easy trades to make, right? Like, those are your pending unrestricted free agents who weren't going to be here moving forward. Think the consensus was 2 good trades. First deal that comes down on Friday is Charlie Coyle and a 2026 5th round pick to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Casey Middlestad, 26-year-old center, who we will get into, forward prospect Will Zellers, and a 2025 second round pick. I don't know about you, but the reaction I saw was almost unanimously positive to that trade. Then we got word that the big one was coming. Brad Marchand was being traded, and shockingly, it was to the Florida Panthers. Now, we didn't get the return on this for a long time, so I want to present this in the way that it's actually played out in real time, because we got news that Marchand was getting traded. Then we got news that Brandon Carlo was also being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we wound up getting that return first. It was forward prospect Fraser Minton, one of Toronto's top prospects, a 2026 first round pick, and a 2025 fourth round pick. Again, reaction I saw was all aboard. People were into that. A little while later, we finally get the Brad Marchand return, and it is a conditional 2027 second round pick. We would learn later, it can be upgraded to a first in either 2027 or 2028 if if the Florida Panthers win 2 playoff rounds this spring and Marchand plays at least 50% of the playoff games. Now, the reaction to this was there's got to be more, right? That cannot possibly be it. Don Sweeney explains it as saying his current upper body injury, complicated trade discussions. Marchand is expected to miss another 3 to 4 weeks. But boy, like, that's the big one, right? Like, that's the Brad Marchand trade. And it wound up leaving a sour taste in people's mouths. And I understand why. Because that just doesn't feel like a whole heck of a lot for Brad Marchand. And so I think where a lot of fans are, and quite frankly, where I am, is like, this conflicted spot of, yeah, today was necessary. And 4 of those trades we just went through got really good returns that you can call a win for Don Sweeney. But the biggest one, the one that everyone cared about the most, Brad Marchand, you feel really underwhelmed. And then just to finish, there were 2 other small deals. They traded a 4th-round pick for Henry Jokiharju, defenseman from the Sabres. And then, now this one's not small to me. They traded Mark McLaughlin to the New Jersey Devils for defense prospect Daniil Misiul, which, how dare you, Don Sweeney? How dare you trade a McLaughlin of Billerica?
Did you see the video I tweeted of Dale on the Nesson feed when they were having their trade? So Nesson was having their trade deadline live show, and Dale was reading the trade in real time, and he said Scott McLaughlin, and so I
really?
Yeah. So and then people behind the scenes were saying Mark, and so he's like, oh, Mark McLaughlin. Obviously, Dale has an affiliation with EEI in the past, and obviously knows you personally, so you just came to his mind. But I tweeted out saying, essentially saying this, it's bullshit that they traded my line mate without consenting me. But yeah, and also worth mentioning that they got Jokiharju from the Trent Frederic 4th-round pick that Edmonton gave them just last week. So where I stand, Scott, is I understand the return for Marchand is underwhelming, and I understand that, and I agree with that. And I will say I feel like there's probably a 60% chance that does turn into a 1st-round pick for Boston in 2028, but still not a guarantee. I'm not going to let that return diminish how well I think they did in the other 4 trades. And I just want to say this real quick, because there sometimes seems to be this misconception of like the Bruins are just getting rid of these guys just to get 3 of the 5 guys that were traded, Scott, they were gone in 18 games for nothing, right? So Trent Frederic was gone next year. Justin Brazeau was gone next year. You got picks and you got some pretty good prospects for them. The return for Justin Brazeau, to me, isn't being talked about enough right now. I think Boston did really well there. I think Jacob Blauko and Justin Brazeau could cancel each other out, for Christ's sake. But the prospect that Boston got from Minnesota, he's a 22-year-old Russian forward. And I know I asked you before we started recording. Can you remind me how to pronounce his last name?
So his name is Marat Husnadinov.
Yeah, that's going to take me years, honestly. Husnadinov. So I tweeted out some highlights from him from the KHL. He's a young prospect. He's undersized, but he's a very crafty, quick skater who has great hands and very good offensive instincts from what I see. And I think that, he was actually at Bruins practice today. Kevin Paul DuPont tweeted out a picture of him. So again, I think he's going to actually be, I think he's going to be a pretty impressive player, whether it's now or maybe in a little bit of time. But so that deal is good. You get a 2nd-round pick for Trent Frederic, who again was gone for nothing this offseason, and he had a terrible season for Boston. I think that is worth, celebrating for Boston. Yes, the return for Marchand is not good. It's not ideal. It's not what we hoped for. Maybe injuries play a factor, and that's what got him less than what we hoped for. But again, in my opinion, when I look at Brad Marchand, it's more of a nostalgia loss right now, because he was either gone at this deadline for a return, he was gone in the summer for nothing, or maybe the Bruins re-sign him and he retires in 2 years. It's just the life without Brad Marchand was coming anyway. It's just never fun to say goodbye to a player like that. But I'm not going to let that Marchand return diminish the return for the other players. Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo, guys with term. In my opinion, Casey Middlestat, he's a former top 10 pick. And yeah, he's had his struggles in Colorado recently. But Charlie Coyle's had his struggles in Boston, and Middlestat's like 7 or 8 years younger than Coyle. And Zellers is a promising prospect. You get a 2nd-rounder for Coyle. You get one of Toronto's best prospects, a 1st and a 4th from Toronto for Carlo. Again, I just think that a lot of these players that the Bruins traded were on expiring contracts or they're declining assets. And you also got cap alleviation from some of these guys with term. Not complete cap alleviation, but a lot of it. And so I think that right now Bruins fans are just kind of shell-shocked because it all came at once. And it's a very overwhelming day. There's so many moving parts. And that Bruins locker room, Scott, is going to be very, very down in the dumps because they lost a lot of good friends and leaders. But when you actually take a step back and you wake up in the morning or later on this week, try to compartmentalize the Brad Marchand departure with the other players. And this team going forward is in a better spot when you consider they parted ways with expiring/declining assets. And from a nostalgic perspective, it's difficult. And even a productionist perspective, Marchand was Boston's second leading scorer. So he was still producing despite turning 37 in May. But again, his time in the league alone is on a clock right now. And then Coyle and Carlo, those are great leaders. But again, were those guys going to be around in 3 years from now? I don't think so. And they weren't even having good years right now. So it's a lot that happened today, Scott. But I think when people take a step back, I think there's pieces in place here where the Bruins have enough pieces still in the system that I don't look at this as a complete rebuild, despite the optics right now and how much they sold today.
So, yeah, Don Sweeney was asked, did this transform from a retool into a rebuild? And he pushed back pretty strongly on that, saying, we didn't tear it all down. We still have pieces. He said that they hope to be back at it next year with I forget his exact words, but basically something like a winning mode, like be back in winning mode, and next year at this time be adding again. What I would say is it is to be determined if this is a retool or a rebuild, because they have a lot of work to do and they have a lot of stuff that they need to get right. Like, yeah, they now have a lot of nice assets, whether that's the players they got. Like, yes, Casey Middlestat is a talented mid-20 center who may have a lot more than what he showed in Colorado. Fraser Minton is a good prospect, who, from people you talk to, if you look at his numbers, whether it's AHL or certainly the 19 NHL games he's played, where I think he only has 2 points, people think he has much more offensive upside than he's been able to tap into so far. We will see if he can. So like there's, who's Nadinov? Yeah, good chance to take. Will Zellers is a prospect I really like. Like that, at the very least, like you might as well call that another second round pick. He was a third round pick. I'd say he's already pretty drastically outperforming his draft position. He's the leading goal scorer in the USHL, second leading point scorer. He's heading to the University of North Dakota next year. Like that's a good piece. And now you have all these picks. The last 2 years, I mentioned this, the Bruins have made one pick in the first 2 rounds of the draft the last 2 years. Over the next 3 drafts, they now have 4 first-round picks and 5 second-round picks. That is real capital. And then potentially an additional first-round pick in 27 or 28. So whether they make all those picks or use them to now go target other players in the offseason, those are real assets that you can use in a retool. But you have to get all this stuff right, or at least most of it right. You have to hit on some of these picks. You need Fraser Minton to be more than a fourth liner. You need Casey Middlestat to be more than a third line center. Like, you need Will Zeller to develop well over the next several years. There's also an alternate possibility here where you didn't land a single top 6 forward or top 4 defenseman out of today. Like, that's also a possibility if this doesn't work out. And if that happens and you don't nail your free agent signings, which, by the way, we just saw last summer, just because you spend big in free agency doesn't mean you get great players, doesn't mean that works out. If you get this next part wrong, which is going to be so crucial over the months and years to come, you could be looking at a very long rebuild, because you could end up in a situation where 3 years from now, you're still stuck out of the playoffs. And now you have David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy looking around at the tail end of their primes saying, why do we want to hang around here? So it's like the overwhelming emotions of like, that's right. And when I think about what this looks like going forward, it's like that same overwhelming kind of conflicting feelings, because it's exciting when you look at the positives of what this could turn into, and then it's terrifying when you look at what happens if they don't get it right.
Yeah, it's totally fair, Scott. I mean, it's step one, right? It's step one. And that doesn't mean that there's not more work to do. Step one is just step one. But what I would say is, even though there's a lot more work to do, can you and I and Bruins fans sit here and honestly sit here and say that the future was bright with Justin Brazeau and Trent Frederic and an aging Charlie Coyle? Like, you get like, it doesn't invalidate what you just said. Boston has to hit. They have to go to work and they have to deliver. But at least there's something worth delivering on. Like, I think they were kind of going down a dead end street before, whereas now I feel like they're driving down a neighborhood with a cul-de-sac. They can turn right around and now they can go the other direction. You know what I mean? So at least there's hope. I didn't really have much hope with some of the guys that they just traded away on their roster going forward. There was no hope for me that Trent Frederic was gonna, even re-sign in the first place. And even if he did turn into what he was the last 2 years or better, Justin Brazeau clearly seems to be a good story from last year, but a bit of a flash in the pan. He's got size and he's got good hands. Doesn't have great speed, doesn't really impact the play very much outside of his, net front presence here and there. Obviously, Carlo and Marchand, their losses are felt on the ice right now, for sure. But again, you could have been losing Marchand for nothing anyway next month. In fact, they may have been. And Carlo, again, he has 2 years left in his deal, so he could have been around for a bit of a retool. But that one's a gamble, right? Like, that, you have to take risks here. And Charlie Coyle, again, he had 1 year left in his deal after this. He's already 33 years old, and he is not only a shell this year of what he was last year with 60 points, which was clearly the anomaly, but he was a shell of his normal 45-point production. So going forward, I would have been far more pessimistic about the Bruins' future, because it would have been more of a dead end. You got Trent Frederic and Brazeau and Coyle. Like, their days were, I don't know. I didn't see it. And now at least there's something worth building. And it's not a complete rebuild, because you do have those key pieces still there. And right now, Scott, I look at the next 18 games, and finally this season, I'm actually excited to watch a Bruins game, because I'm not going to turn on the game and see David Pastrnak doing his thing, but then all of his teammates just kind of playing the same slow, boring hockey. They might still have a lot of losses in the next 18 games, but
I think they are.
No, they probably will. But my point is, I'm excited to get the opportunity to watch and assess new, fresh faces with new opportunity and new ceilings, and see how players make their opportunity in these next 18 games. I'm curious to see how David Pastrnak responds as the only guy. It's like the Will Smith meme where he's in the living room by himself, because Charlie McAvoy is still out with an injury, even though he was skating today. So there's a lot of things that I want to see in these next 18 games, that if Boston kind of stood pat or just traded Frederic and Brazeau, I might be more just, well, the next 18 games are still going to be a drag. And there's something to watch and assess right now until the season ends.
There is, and you're right. Like, I'm excited to see some of these new pieces too. What I want to point out, and like a segment of the fan base I want to make sure we give a voice to, is not every Bruins fan is like us, where they're going to be excited to see these pieces. I think there's a lot of Bruins fans, because I've heard from them on Twitter, and some of them are my friends who texted me, and one was my mom who called me, who are like totally done with this team, like out, don't want to watch, are pissed off at what happened today. Um, like Brad Marchand obviously was loved here, and Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo, to a lesser extent, but still to a notable extent, were also loved by a lot of fans. And there is, I don't know the percentages. I haven't conducted any polls, but just informally and anecdotally, like there are Bruins fans who are pissed off right now and who are not going to watch these last 18 games, and who are going to have to be hooked back in by something, whether that's in the offseason, whether it's the team getting off to a good start next year. But there's a lot of fans who obviously were already frustrated with where the season was going, and now see some of their favorite players, and at the very top, maybe their number one favorite player from the last 15 years, gone, and they don't really care about draft picks or young players who might develop into something. Like, there is also a lot of anger out there. So yes, like we're going to continue to be excited to do this podcast and talk about this team, and I now have new guys to write about and get to know, and that's exciting. But not everyone comes at it from that angle.
No, I understand that. And look, I don't mean to, because so much movement happened today, there's so much to talk about. And I certainly don't want to gloss over the loss of Brad Marchand and his impact on the team. And perhaps that could be, we can maybe have more time for that in ensuing podcasts, because he is one of the greatest Bruins to ever do it. He's a Stanley Cup champion, and he's been a fan favorite in this town for almost 20 years. And like, that sucks. Like, people grew up with him, and it's a shitty thing to see a player of that caliber move on. But unfortunately, like, it's a business. And when you're a franchise that's been around for 100 years, it's not the first, it's not the last time that there's turnover. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of fans, and I hope this is something that happens in the next 5 years, but because I'm just saying there were probably a lot of fans that were pissed off when Joe Thornton was traded, and were checking out, and the Garden was half full for the 05 to 07 season. And in fact, when Claude Julien came back as Bruins head coach in 07-08, it took until like almost St. Patrick's Day, Easter. There was a St. Patrick's Day game against the Flyers where the city was kind of taking notice of, oh, the Bruins are kind of good again. Oh, who's this Milan Lucic? Who's this David Krejci? So there's ebbs and flows in professional sports. And just like fans were upset back in 05, 06, guess what? There was a Stanley Cup champion 6-7 years later, full of players that the city loved and adored and does to this day, like a Brad Marchand. So it's kind of the cycle of professional sports. We just haven't had to deal with it in so long. And that doesn't invalidate how fans feel when they get upset. Fans are allowed to be emotional. They're allowed to wear their hearts in their sleeves, because that's what professional sports is all about for them. Like, it's entertainment. Of course, it sucks when your favorite players go, but it's a business, and this stuff happens. And I promise, like, you can boycott these last 20 games and you can not watch them until they're good again. That's totally up to you guys. I would just say there will come a day where there's new faces, new blood, new fan favorites. It's just the nature of pro sports.
Yeah, and in the immediate short term, like, and you're right that like maybe ownership deserves some credit for being willing to face this. Like, there's a chance that the sellout streak ends this season. I know that there'd been some confusion about it possibly ending earlier this year. The Bruins have said technically it didn't end and is still going. That could end before the end of the season. If next season it isn't an immediate bounce back, it could end then. I was thinking of things like when you go to a Bruins game and you look around, like, who are the jerseys that you see? It's 88, 63, still a lot of 37, some 73, some 1. in the lineup for these last 18 games, it might just be like one guy, David Pastrnak, that people have bought jerseys of in any sort of significant number. That is a hard sell. I was also thinking, like, who's wearing the A's the next game? McAvoy is still out injured. Hampus Lindholm is injured. He's worn an A before. Recently, it had been Pastrnak, Coyle, and Carlo. Coyle and Carlo are now gone. Like, Pastrnak has one that they're not going to give out a C right away. Don Sweeney did say that. So there won't be a new C the rest of this season. I'm sure that'll be for next training camp that they'll decide that. But like the rest of the way, or at least until McAvoy comes back, who on this team is even wearing A's?
Pastrnak, Middlestat, and Yuki Haru. No, but it's true, Scott. Like that's something that it's. I mean, maybe Zadorov, maybe Elias Lindholm. Like I don't know. I mean,
maybe Morgan Geekie, who
yeah.
I think has actually stepped up as like a good voice in that room.
And thanks for bringing his name up because we talked about him a lot, and he was asked about to Don Sweeney during the press conference today too. Morgan Geekie was not traded today, so he's a guy who had 22 goals in the season heading into today's deadline, 2 goals against Carolina, and his stock was probably pretty high. And if this was a true tear it down rebuild type of thing, Geekie would be gone today. Zacha would be gone today. Like there are still pieces there. So David Pastrnak still has his line mates that he enjoys that Bridget and yourself and me were talking about last week. But from a leadership perspective, there's no McAvoy in the room right now. It's just Pastrnak, and it's gonna be a weird feeling for him. I have to imagine that this will help Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak grow as leaders, because something I mentioned to you and Bridget a few months ago, I think, or maybe like a month and a half ago, was I wonder if McAvoy and Pastrnak can't evolve into the true leaders they should be on this team in a world where Brad Marchand is still in the locker room as the captain, because sometimes when Big Brother is still around, you just defer to him a lot. And it's kind of like they're the man of the house now. And so I wonder if, and that, no Coyle and no Carlo. So like they really have to shoulder the leadership that was lost at this deadline.
Yeah, it forces them into it. And in a tough spot, because Charlie McAvoy's not with the team right now. The team is down in Tampa. Charlie McAvoy was on the ice this morning at Warrior. I don't know if it was his first time skating since the injury or not. You know, we don't get to see every private skate, but he was on the ice this morning, but he's in Boston. You know, now it's 2025. Obviously they can Zoom and FaceTime and whatever, but that's still very different than being in the room with your teammates at a time when there's going to be a lot of people in that room looking around, needing leadership and guidance. And really in the immediate short term, like that is all going to fall on David Pastrnak, and it's a lot to ask of him. And Don Sweeney said that he talked to both Pastrnak and McAvoy today. I asked him what their reactions were, and I didn't expect to get it, but I needed to ask. And he declined to answer, but he just said that he thought it was important to talk to them, which obviously it was. And another thing he referenced was, you know, whether this was their idea or something he mentioned, was he mentioned the value of veterans like Kevin Shattenkirk and James Van Riemsdyk, who were here last year, which we've talked about as, you know, whether they have a letter or not, just guys who know how to handle the NHL and have been around and can help out your captains, which makes me think, like, right away, mental note, okay, this coming off season, expect the Bruins to not just target talented young core players, but expect them to look for another Shattenkirk, Van Riemsdyk, one of those veterans that they can bring in here who can help McAvoy and Pastrnak in their first full season now as the guys. Yeah, it's obviously like a major career moment for those guys, because it is now very clearly their team, and there is no Marchand, Bergeron, there's no one else to lean on here. Like it's you guys now.
Yeah, and I just want to say again, like the Martian loss, it as a Bruins fan, it's no fun. It sucks. But again, he turns 37, Scott. He turns 37 years old in 2 months. So life after him was coming regardless. And I want to read to you something from John Buccigross from an hour ago. Somebody asked him online if there's any chance that Marchand's back in Boston next year, because that's another narrative that's been out there, Scott, is the Bruins get the best of both worlds. You trade Marchand for a return, then he comes back in the summer as a UFA. But whether the likelihood of that is high or not, I'm not going to speak to that. But somebody asked Buccigross a question. And Buccigross said, I don't see why not. The Bruins offered 2 years, around $3 million, I'm told. He wants 3 years or a little more money for 2 years. I think he deserves it. He's been a good underpaid soldier, always in shape. So if the Bruins end up with a 1 and Marchand back, good deal. So, Scott, that kind of speaks to the gap that Don Sweeney mentioned in his press conference. And I got to be honest, it's not as much of a gap as I maybe thought there would have been. And because again, if the Bruins let him go for nothing in the offseason, I guess like that would suck. But this return for him, I can understand why people look at this return and say, I would have just kept him. And this kind of seems like they could have kept him and that they were close enough where they may have worked something out in the summer. I don't know if I see him going to Florida and then coming back to Boston. It's kind of like too much has happened. I don't really see that. But what do you make of the what John Buccigross was hearing? It's not a report, we should say, but
Yeah, you don't rule anything out. Obviously, it's a possibility. They both sides love each other. I just have a hard time seeing it. You know, look, Butchergrass might be right with his numbers. I had gotten the sense the gap was bigger than that. Um, Sweeney today referenced Marchand having the right to see what his market value is, or value himself at a certain level. That Look, if Brad Marchand wants to get market value, it's going to be significantly more than 3 million a year. Like, he's still a really solid second line winger in the NHL. Those guys don't make 3 million. They make 5, 6, 7 million, especially with the cap going up. So, yeah, maybe it is a small enough gap that that door is wide open, but I get the sense more that it's closer to being closed than it is being wide open for them to both walk through and hug each other again this summer. Um, Sweeney said that's probably a better question for Marchand, and it probably is. And I'm sure whenever he's available to media down in Florida, maybe he'll be asked about it. I don't know. There's like one or two guys who cover the Panthers on a regular basis, so maybe he won't be. Who knows? But yeah, look, I mean, what I would keep coming back to is they've been negotiating a contract all season and didn't get it done. And there was a very clear deadline this week, meaning the trade deadline, and they still couldn't get it done. Like, I just don't see what would give me hope that, okay, after Marchand goes off to Florida and potentially has a playoff run and maybe even wins this cup with the defending champs, all of a sudden, like, they're going to come back to the table and bridge whatever gap was there that they haven't been able to bridge in 5 months. Like, I don't know, it just doesn't seem likely to me. But again, I won't completely rule it out.
And I feel like Marchand might not want to come back into that dressing room that has been kind of now forced to Pasternak and McAvoy, and maybe he just wants to allow it to just kind of be their thing now. Like I wonder, because we were talking about this along the way, and I viewed the Bruins retooling as having Marchand in their future. Like if the Bruins wanted to retool on the fly and sell on Carlo, sell on Coyle, sell on Brazeau, sell on Frederic, and come back next year, like to your point about how he's still producing, like I saw a world where Marchand is still very much producing in your middle six, or top six, right? Obviously. So I am a bit surprised that they just didn't find the common ground to have him as a part of that. And it makes me wonder, Scott, if maybe moving on from him is just as much about the symbolism as it is the return. Like maybe Boston just felt like if we're going to do this, we might as well just turn the page kind of completely. And what bigger way to move on to the next era than to close the final chapter on the last remaining one from 2011. Like it, to the point about McAvoy and Pastrnak and it being their team now. I wonder if there's some symbolism in moving on from Marchand that Boston may have considered felt right as well. And fans would be completely understandable to be upset about that. But I'm just thinking out loud if that could be at play here.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. And I also think that's why it'd be hard to bring Marchand back, because it is very much once you rip the Band-Aid off, like it's off, like it's just hard. It would be hard to get everyone on the same page where it's like, yeah, we're going to trade away the captain for the rest of this year, but then he might come back and retake the C. And it's like, no, like Pastrnak and McAvoy are now faced with this situation that they have to navigate. And yeah, like it would be weird to then bring Marchand back and be like, hey guys, thanks for, being in charge of that shit show we had the last 18 games when we knew we were going to suck. And yeah, by the way, like you're back to alternate captains and we're putting Brad in charge again. Like doesn't really seem to work to me, but I don't know. Maybe that's what Sweeney talked to them about today. And like maybe everyone's okay with that. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, look, there's obviously even beyond Marchand, we mentioned it, like Carlo and Coyle. You didn't just shake up the product on the ice, like you really shook up that room. And how this group now kind of comes together from here and what it looks like and who the leaders are and who else rises to the challenge to become a leader and a core piece. Like it's going to be fascinating to see. It's like we know Pastrnak and McAvoy at the top, but Hampus Lindholm's going to be there. But again, he's another guy who's not there every day right now. Like he's out hurt. He's done for the season. It's just tough because this is a moment where it's like there's a lot of guys on that team that are going to need the leadership, and there's just not a lot of places to look for it on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis in that room.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, because so much has happened on the ice, I really think people will be surprised as to how much better or worse Boston will even be than they already have been this year. Like, Casey Middlestat has 34 points this year. And I don't have Coyle and Frederic's numbers in front of me, but it's probably pretty close to their point total combined, honestly. So it's not like the Bruins just got nothing but third-round draft picks back. Like, Middlestat can play, and it's the classic can a change of scenery, like, can it help a player? Because the kid has skill, former top 10 pick. So, and he's just Jacob Lauko, Bruins fans are familiar with him. He doesn't have a ton of offense, but how much offense did Justin Brazeau give the last little while, or Max Jones? Like, we know Lauko is an effective forechecker. He's a pest. He works really hard. I like a guy like that on our team. I was sad to see Lauko go for those reasons. He has good speed. You upgraded your speed with Lauko and Middlestat right there. And the prospect from Minnesota that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce right now because I keep forgetting, he has good speed.
Husnudinov.
Harry Husnudinov. He has good speed and skill. the prospect from Toronto, like he has good speed and skill. So nothing's a guarantee, but Boston got faster. Like they got faster.
Which, like, about time, because Cam
Yeah.
Neely said at the end of last season they had to get faster, and then they got slower over the summer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, don't know why that wasn't addressed earlier, but you're right. It has been now. Like, this is definitely a faster team. Now I still don't know like how many of these guys are actually in the lineup whenever you're good again or next
Right.
season, but there's probably still more turnover to come. Like realistically, like I think we're gonna tune in Saturday to their game down in Tampa, and you're gonna be like, wow, that's a lot of guys who are fourth liners and fringe NHLers. Now, some of them you hope push to be more than that for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in the short term, like if we're just being real, you're a one line team.
Which they
You've
already
got
were.
right.
They already were a one-line team. That's what they were before the deadline. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, like
so
at least when before Marchand got hurt, like at least he was providing some secondary scoring. So we'll
yeah.
see. Like maybe Casey Middlestad walks right in and provides some of that. But yeah, it's like not that your second line was anything special, but now 2/3 of that even are gone. Like Marchand and Coyle are out. So yeah, like the world just got it just got tougher for Elias Lindholm, who had at least somewhat settled into this matchup role. He had put together, put up some points over the last month or so. And it's like now both of your line mates are gone, Elias. Like, go figure it out on your own with
Yeah.
new line mates. Matt Poitras is gonna have to do more, and like that's another guy who hasn't really been putting up a whole lot of points. I know everyone likes him, we all do, but like someone's gonna have to step up and produce. Like they got to score some goals. So, and that's not obvious. Like, look, they're not going to the playoffs. Like, I'm not talking about they need to score to make a playoff push. I'm saying like they need to score because you need to know that you have some guys who can produce for you going forward.
Yeah. Which is actually funny, Scott, because they still technically aren't that far out of the playoffs.
They're
I
3 points out.
it's bizarre. But yeah, obviously the Bruins were a one-line team plus Marchand. I mean, it's not like Marchand, Coyle, and Lindholm had much of chemistry. But I will say, Scott, when you just said they're out Marchand now, it just kind of hit me like that Marchand is gone. It's because there's been so much information today. It's almost like I haven't really processed that part, and it is weird. It's very, very strange. Of all the moves they made, I don't think they had to make that one. I think they could have made the other four, kept Marchand, and I think all Bruins fans would have been like, "What a home run of a day!" But the Bruins tugged on the heartstrings of Bruins Nation, and I'll be honest, yeah, it doesn't seem like a 28 potential first round pick was worth parting with Marchand, but like I said off the top of the podcast, I like the other four moves so much for Boston that I'm not going to let it say that the day was a loss. Like I still think overall that they improved. They put themselves in a better position for the future. That's the best way I can describe it. Now they have to capitalize. They have work to do. They got to deliver, like you said earlier. But they put themselves in a better position. They got more prospects. They got more picks in the system, and some players that are NHL, potentially NHL ready to step up. So it's just the Marchand one. I will admit that one to me, I don't think they had to do that move for that return. I'm also surprised, Scott, that was the only return out there that they were able to capitalize on. I know Marchand had an 8-team no trade list, and you just don't know. Maybe Marchand was adamant and told Sweeney, like, send me to Florida if you're going to do anything. Like, nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors, but it does seem like, was there nobody else out there that could have given them more than a conditional second round pick?
Yeah, and Don Sweeney said that they did work with Marchand's camp on preferred destinations. Now, what makes it so surprising is that all the reporting had been that he's going to get traded out west. Like that's what came. That was Chris Johnston's report Thursday night, like the one that first gained traction, was that it was someone out west, and then you heard, Vegas, Colorado, Los Angeles Kings, maybe Dallas. Well, Colorado went out and got Brock Nelson instead. That was their big forward addition. Dallas had this on again, off again thing going on with Mikko Rantanen, ended up being on. They got Mikko Rantanen and extended him. So obviously they were going to be out on Marchand.
Wait, Scott, real quick before you continue, can we laugh about how the Avalanche traded Rantanen to Carolina, thinking that he was going to the other conference, and now they might face him in the first round against Dallas?
Yeah, that'll be fun. Like,
didn't even derail you, but that is just comical. That's like cartoon type shit.
Yeah. And then like those other teams, like, I don't know, did Marchand not want to go to Los Angeles? I think he would have gone to Vegas. Him and Bruce Cassidy have a good relationship. I think he would have gone there, but did Vegas not step up? Did they have too many questions about his injury? Like, we just don't know why those teams didn't step up more. LA went smaller. They traded for Andrei Kuzmenko. That was the forward they added. Like, I think just about anyone would take Marchand over Kuzmenko, but again, did they have too many questions about the injury and how that was going to play out the rest of the way? Whereas Florida maybe just decided, screw it, like, we'll go for it. So, yeah, but they were not a team we had heard. No one had mentioned the Florida Panthers being in on Marchand.
It's almost like it's the rattiest thing of Marchand's career.
Yeah, right? Like, to like trade him in the conference, and then B, to such a hated rival that has ended your last two seasons. Like, that's the other part that I think is just going to be tough for some Bruins fans to swallow, is going to be seeing Marchand out there with the Florida Panthers in the playoffs. Like, maybe playing on a line with Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk. Like, that could be a line.
By the way, Florida comes to TD Garden in 4 days.
It looked like you were like getting ready to throw up in your mouth with it, which I think is what a lot of Bruins fans are going to do. So,
no. But the Panthers come to town next week.
Yeah, Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday. You know, Scott.
Now, Marchand's probably not playing.
No,
we expect
no.
him to still be out. But...
Well, Sweeney said that his timetable was like 3 to 4 weeks, right?
Yeah. And I saw Bill Zito, Florida's GM, also said probably at least a couple weeks, but they'll reevaluate him when he gets down there.
Yeah. I mean, I think Marchand probably enjoyed playing with Sam Bennett at Four Nations. I think Marchand has seen up close and personal just how good Florida is in the playoffs. And if he's trying to win a Stanley Cup, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. He probably sees himself having a better chance in Florida against as opposed to going to maybe Vegas or LA, because he doesn't know those teams as well. I bet also family may have came into play. Maybe Marchand wanted to be on the East Coast in case he ever needed to fly up to Boston for family reasons, as opposed to being out in California or something. So there's probably reasons as to why it happened. And it's obviously, I'm joking about Marchand going to Florida as being the rattiest thing he's done, but it is funny. It's like he's been our rat for 20 years, and then he ends up going to the Bruins' biggest rival. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. One part of the Bruins being sellers that Bruins fans aren't used to. But if you're a fan of these players because you're sad to see them go, here's some good news for you. There's a really good chance that one of your favorite Bruins, as of 24 hours ago, is going to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, Brandon Carlo. Obviously, the Leafs have some demons to get through, but they're a really good team. You got Carlo with Toronto. You got Marchand with Florida. You have Charlie Coyle as a third-line center in Colorado. They're built to win a Stanley Cup. Obviously, Trent Frederic went to Edmonton along with Max Jones, although I think Providence Bruins fans are more familiar with him than Bruins fans. And then Justin Brazeau in Minnesota, who's less of a contender, more of a playoff team. But if you're a fan of these players, for the first time in 20 years, the Bruins are sellers. So I think there's a good chance one of those guys wins a Stanley Cup, because, you know, unless Washington or Winnipeg or LA or Carolina or Dallas wins, like, then it's kind of the teams that have former Bruins now.
Yeah, and I think Bruins fans would be happy for any of those guys individually, but I don't think anyone's gonna convert to rooting for Florida or Toronto in any kind of series. If those two face each other in the second round, again, like, I think, you know, you'll be interested in watching Marchand going up against Carlo, like that could be a matchup that you would see a lot. But ultimately, Bruins fans probably still rooting for the asteroid in that series.
For sure, but it does make dynamics fun. Like if there's gonna be a playoff season that doesn't have the Bruins involved, it adds a different wrinkle for Bruins fans to tune into Panthers Toronto in round 1 or round 2 and seeing Marchand going against Carlo, or to see a Oilers Avalanche conference finals and see Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederic, who are best friends, battling for right to go to the Cup finals. Like, these are interesting dynamics at play. Scott, there's so much to talk about, but we can only fit in so much tonight. Like, I'm not even gonna give you the question about what this lineup will look like in Tampa, because there are certain players that aren't even in town yet. But let's talk about the cap alleviation. So when Carlo went to Toronto, I think Boston retained 25% of Carlo's salary.
15%.
Okay, so Toronto is taking the rest of Carlo's salary, so that's off Boston's books. I think Colorado took all of Coyle's, but then again, Boston took Middlestats. I think they were pretty comparable.
Yeah, so Bruins added 500,000. It was
okay.
5.75 Middlestat, 5.25 Coyle.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, obviously Frederic, Brazeau, Marchand were pending UFA, so they'd be off the books anyway in the summertime. But Boston did gain some more cap space for free agency. And I know that there's fans out there that aren't comfortable with the Bruins spending based off of last season, and I get that, right? But if you're talking about this team retooling, let's see how they look in the next 18 games. I'm curious, how does Middlestat look? How do some other guys look? Do the Bruins end up with a top 10 pick? Does that top 10 pick in the lottery turn into a top 5 pick? Do they spend appropriately in free agency? Are there any hockey trades on the horizon? Is Don Sweeney even a GM making these decisions? Like, there's a lot to figure out still, but there's a lot that can be done to make the Bruins competitive next year when you consider the fact they didn't trade David Pastrnak. They didn't trade Charlie McAvoy. Like, imagine if one of those guys got traded, what Bruins fans would be saying. I know Marchand is a fan favorite, but when you strip away everything he's done for the Bruins, he's a 37-year-old expiring contract. So it's like,
yeah. And again, like, not to be at the wet blanket on some of this, but just as a warning, like, this cap space gets used up a lot quicker than people think. So looking just at Puckpedia, as of right now, the Bruins are projected to have just under $28 million in cap space this offseason. But that is with only 12 NHL roster spots filled. So, and 2 of those are goalies, so only 10 skaters. So that's basically 10 skaters you have to fill in. Like, okay, Morgan Geekie, again, we touched on, didn't get traded. Don Sweeney said there's work to do in an extension, but he does think they'll get one done. So that's encouraging, but okay, you got to get that done. Johnny Beecher, you got to decide if he's back. He's a restricted free agent. Jacob Lauko is a restricted free agent. You're going to have young guys or, moving in that you're going to have to fill out your roster, figure out who you sign. On defense, it's McAvoy, Lindholm, Zadorov, Peak. Yoki Haru is unrestricted. Again, that might end up just being a rental. Lohrei is restricted. He'll get some kind of raise. We'll see how much. So, like, it's just, that's a lot of roster spots to fill. And yes, you might be able to go out and acquire 1 or 2 premium pieces. You're going to have to. But I just don't want people thinking like they have $50 million in cap space and they can go sign or trade for like 5 top end, like high end players. Like, that's not how it's going to go. And by the way, there could still be more retooling. Like, there could still be other trades of some of these guys in the off season. So more to come, but like, again, maybe I'm just feeling like a little too negative, but like, I just want to drive home. Like, this isn't going to be easy.
No,
you don't just have like all the money in the world to go fill all these holes that you very clearly have. So, it's gonna, like I said, it's a lot of work, and you got to get a lot of things right.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I mean, like I said, I think that this first round draft pick in 2025 has a chance to be top 10. I think a good chance to be top 10, Scott. And that lottery, man, an original six team, those balls, those balls can they can they can land in the right spot for those original six teams. So the Bruins need a number one center. I don't know if that's coming in free agency in the next 2 years. It could be. I don't know. I think the organic way is through the draft, and I think they have a top 10 pick on the horizon this year. And I think that there's 4 or 5 centermen in the draft that will be available in the top 10 picks or close to it that I'm not saying are generational talents, but I definitely think have the potential to be a franchise center for Boston. And so these picks, these prospects, they're great, but you still got to get that number one center. And there's still a lot of work to do. I, for one, I'm excited to see it happen. Do I have my doubts in Sweeney's drafting and developing overall? Of course I do. Of course I do. I don't know how you could be overly optimistic or comfortable with him, despite having some good moments as well. So like I don't think Sweeney's getting fired, but you're right. They have to hit on these picks. So boy, what a day. What a day for the Boston Bruins. Mixed emotions for sure for a lot of Bruins fans, but you know what? They have to replenish the cupboard, and I think that today was a big first step in doing so. Sucks to see Marchand go. I think they could have accomplished both. I think they could have gotten all the returns they did for the other guys, which they did, and then not traded Marchand for a glorified first round pick. Actually, might not even be a first round pick, but that's okay. One deal at a time. How would you grade the day overall, Scott?
So right before we started recording, I was actually on Christian Arcan's night show on EI, and he had me grade all the trades, and then we averaged it out. And for the entire deadline, so not just Friday, I ended up at a B. And that felt about right. Like, liked a lot of it, but the Marchand trade leaves a sour taste in my mouth, and like I can't. That alone makes me not able to go better than a B.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Scott. I could go B plus, just not give the same answer as you, but I'm closer to a B than a B plus, so I'll go with a B as well. I mean, at the end of the day, you got rid of 3 pending UFAs that were going to be gone for nothing in the summer, and you got a pretty good haul for the 2 players that you traded that still had term. So when it's all said and done, the Bruins got a first round draft pick, you got 3 second round draft picks, you got a 6th round draft pick, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players / prospects. I mean, for Frederic, Brazeau, Coyle, Carlo, that's pretty damn good. And obviously, the Marchand was the one that, honestly, all that return came before Marchand. Like, that's why the deadline today was so like. That's why I'm saying those first 4 deals were great because the Marchand got no return and they got a lot today. So or between today and Frederic as well. So, Scott, I think I'm probably good unless you have anything else. There's been a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there sure has, and yeah, I think we can just about wrap this up. I don't. So much has happened, and we were like so excited to just get going. We didn't even mention why Bridget isn't here. She has a college broadcast Friday night, so that's obviously why she's not on with us. She will be with me on Sunday Skate Sunday morning on WEI, as will Andrew Razor Raycroft. So a lot more breakdown coming there. We start at 9 a.m. and of course I think there's going to continue to be a lot to say about this and about how the new guys look, and we'll be there every step of the way.
Yeah, I know. Last time we spoke to Bridget about this. She was talking about how Sweeney said it was going to be a cautious approach, and she didn't think Marchand was going. So she's gonna have the emoji of like the exploding head when she comes in. I can't wait to see what she thinks of all this. And obviously, everybody listening, like tweet at us, comment on YouTube, email us. Like we want everybody's opinions and feedback. So thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next week. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.